going back and forth a lot, so I'll probably operate it myself. If you don't mind, appreciate it. Am I using this mic too? Yep. Okay.
There we go. Okay.
I'm good to go?
Yep.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you guys so much for giving me some time to speak today. My name is Mr. Camdyn Gavilan, and you can see the title of my little talk today, Race, Poverty, and Education. Call me Mr. I have a couple big ideas I hope that stick with you after this talk today about education and how it can be used to maintain a status quo or as a tool to facilitate positive changes, and that removing barriers in regard to education helps create better opportunities. And you can see I have aligned my talk around the SDG of quality education. And the main barriers I'm talking about in regard to education are how race and poverty have impacts on access to high quality education. I'm going to introduce you a problem called the achievement gap. And while this problem is quite specific to the United States, there's a lot that we can learn from this. You will notice that this achievement gap is in reference to students' academic performance and is broken down by different races, as you can see in this data point. And it's become a trend in the United States that we notice that white students are significantly outperforming their Black and Hispanic and other minorities as early as age 9, as you can see in this specific data point. And it really doesn't matter what kind of test or data point you pull, we notice a pattern of white students outperforming their Black and Hispanic peers. So to me, I don't really like this, that somebody's skin color can determine the quality of education that they can get, especially if they're living in the same place. So now that I've kind of introduced this problem to you, I'm going to be explaining much more about it throughout this talk today. You can see here I have another data point about the achievement gap in which white students consistently outperform their minority and minority peers. So why is this happening? One reason I think that contributes to the achievement gap has to do with a disconnect between teacher and student demographics. One idea that I might have is that maybe Black and other minority students are not performing as well in school because the school culture is very different from the cultures that they have at home, or maybe they have a lack of role models within the building to relate to at a more cultural level. And you can see this specific chart I've shown here, showing you the teacher demographic in the United States, where you can see the vast majority of teachers are white, and there are very few percentages for Black, Hispanic, and other minority teachers. Okay? So this is one thing that I think contributes to the achievement gap, that a lack of quality educators of minority background to serve a minority population causes a disconnect in contributing to an achievement gap and contributing to this lack of a quality education for these students. So this begs the next question. Why is there so few quality professionals of minority background to teach these students? We have to do some research into the history of racism in the United States to understand that after slavery we entered into an era of segregation, also known as the Jim Crow era, in reference to the Jim Crow laws, which enforced segregation during this time period. And if you know anything about the Jim Crow laws, you know that they basically enforced the segregation rules in just about every aspect of life, from movie theaters to water fountains, bathrooms, lunch counters, sidewalks, and even addressing a Black man by a title Sir or Mr. And you might hear me mention that again later on. And sometimes we have this idea, this whitewashed version of history, that Martin Luther King had a dream and then everything became perfectly integrated in the United States. But the reality is that was not exactly the case. In many cases, the federal government had to force integration upon schools, districts as late as the 1970s. And when schools were forced to integrate, this resulted in Black schools being closed, Black teachers losing their jobs, and as such, the number of Black teachers has steadily decreased since this point and has not really recovered. I experienced this myself as a young man. In the public school system, I was in 7th grade. I was quite a teacher's pet star student type, and I had taken a standardized test in grade 7, and at the end of the test, I had some extra time on my hands where I couldn't do anything. Test booklet had some scratch paper at the back. I copied down some Lil Wayne lyrics at the back of the test, and then I didn't think anything of it. A few weeks had passed. I went on in 7th grade. I won the math competition for my school, and then I participated in Science Bowl, all the nerdy stuff. A few weeks later, my principal called me into the office and spoke to me about some concerns he had in my test booklet, and basically just accused me of being a gang member because I had copied these Lil Wayne lyrics into my test booklet. And that was my first and only behavior referral I ever got as a student for gang activity. And he wouldn't really believe my word that these were just lyrics. I wasn't involved in a gang. I was 12 years old, you know, I was only at home or school. And this kind of stuck with me because I noticed for the first time that I was being treated differently based on the color of my skin in the public school setting. And I didn't really identify as much with my principal as I did with, for example, Lil Wayne. My self-image is much more on the left than it is on the right. And I think that speaks to the situation for a lot of students in our public school system when you have a majority white culture teaching the students that can't relate to the culture of the minority students in the classroom. Okay, so I hope this is kind of just a short example to show you how sometimes race can affect your access to quality education and can sometimes create a barrier to your education. I was pulled from class and I was treated kind of in a profiled way, strictly based off my skin color and a misinterpretation of my culture. Another barrier I mentioned is poverty limits access to education. And I come from a very, very poor household where nobody in my family has gone to college besides me. And like I mentioned, I was a good student. I wanted to do what my teachers were telling me to do. They said, go to college and get a job. I said, all right, I got to figure that out, how to go to college and get a job. But I had to come up with some money to pay for the SAT test because that was $50. That was a lot of money. I asked my parents. They said, we don't got the money. So I had to make a deal with my Grammy. I took her credit card and I signed up to take the SAT. Following that, I had to make a deal with her that I would pay her back next time I got paid for my first job, which was washing dishes at a pizza restaurant down the street. And then I knew that I could only take it once because I wasn't about to pay $50 again. And not only that, I knew I had to place above a 1200 on my SAT in order to earn a scholarship that I have screenshotted on the screen for you. And to earn the scholarship, I needed to score over 1200. Another barrier to my education because I already showed you how test taking favors white students by a significant gap. So strictly based off probability, I'm at a disadvantage here, okay? So with some luck, I was able to take this SAT one time. I did score quite highly, and I turned that $50 test into $30,000 of tuition money, leveraging me access over this poverty barrier and giving me an opportunity to go to college as a young man, okay? So I was able to use some support systems in my favor to access this opportunity, but there's so many other young men who look like me, who come from the same background as me, who aren't afforded these same opportunities in regard to their education. As I was learning all of this, I became kind of considering about education as a career because I wanted to help other people have better experiences in school that I was slowly learning about this achievement gap and how it affects young men like me. And I found about the Call Me Mr. program, which gets its namesake from the fact that just 2 generations ago, it would be technically illegal to address a man by even this title. And that's basically the goal of the Call Me Mr. program, is to increase the available pool of teachers from diverse backgrounds in South Carolina, where I was living at the time, with only a 1% of African American teachers serving about a 40% African American student body. And so far, the Call Me Mr. program has been highly effective in increasing the amount of African American men teachers in South Carolina from 1% to 3%, effectively tripling the amount of teachers. You can see some of the men here. You can see Dr. Roy Jones, who founded the Call Me Mr. program, you can see Dr. Jerome Christia, who was my mentor at Coastal Carolina through the Call Me Mr. program. Dr. Walter Lee is another big inspiration to me. Dr. Rashad Anderson, who is a music teacher who sent me this nice sweater all the way out here to Japan. And Dr. Winston Holton, another Clemson Education Department professor. And my best friend and former roommate, Mr. Eric Stallings, Charleston County Teacher of the Year. And so this was kind of the first time that I really identified with other men who looked like me, who had similar goals than me, that I could use both as a support group and as a mentor for my own self, role models for my own life. Okay, and by the way, it's just kind of enlightening to see this many black men with the title Mr. and Doctor before their name when you just go back 1 or 2 generations ago to a Jim Crow era where this is even unheard of. You would be denied admittance to a PhD program to begin with. So this kind of got me really interested in thinking about how can I leverage my position in becoming a teacher to help other people have better educational opportunities and have access to a higher level of education, especially students who come from impoverished and lower income backgrounds and students that look like me. And I was really fired up as I got to be around graduation in May 2015. And then I had a hard reality check in regard to racism again. On June 17, 2015, I was in the process of moving from Coastal Carolina, where I had graduated college, to the city of Charleston, South Carolina. And since I was moving, I was frequenting the College of Charleston library as a place to use Wi-Fi, study, plan my first lessons. And I was also teaching summer school at a nearby school. And then one night on June 17th, I was in the library as usual, and there was a lot of police out of nowhere. Campus security was in the library, so I immediately got out of there. And then the evening was filled with more police helicopter sounds and emergency sirens. And the more and more we found out about this night, we found out that this was the night of the Charleston church shooting you may be familiar with, in which a man entered the Mother Emanuel Church you see pictured on the right, and sat in Bible study with the people there for about an hour before murdering 9 of the people there. And the next day, he was still on the run, and I was teaching summer school, and all we knew at the time was that a hate crime had occurred. So we had to put our school on a code yellow lockdown, which means shelter in place because there might be a danger in the community, and we don't want students out on the playground or things like that, right? So again, we see how race can affect somebody's access to education. It's hard to really explain this stuff to students, and they're not really concerned too much about fractions when this is happening in your community. And it's really hard to explain that when your parents have no answers as they deal with a traumatic event like this, or your teachers deal with a traumatic event like this as well. And then the really scary part that really shook me is that I was actually at his initial target as the police investigation ended up coming to discover more information about this horrendous attack, that actually the College of Charleston was his original target, where I was that evening of June 17th. So the point of that is that it really strengthened my position as a public school teacher, that I needed to provide something more to my students than simply reading, writing, and math. I also needed to teach my students about who they are and what they could do in this world and how to engage with the world around them. And just like I had some support systems in place through finding the Call Me Mr. program and through the Lucky SAT, I wanted to provide opportunities for other people to have access to a higher quality of education. And that's what really fired me up. So I had to think about how could I make this really attainable to my first classes of students at the 5th grade who had already come with so much preconceived notions of what they could and couldn't do in the world. And many of them had not considered college as an option, just as I hadn't considered college as an option, because I just didn't see people like them doing those types of things. So I'll share with you one thing I'm very proud of that I did as a teacher. I said, how can I make college real for my group of 5th graders? So I said, let me take my 5th graders to college. So I brought them to college. I brought them to Coastal Carolina University, and we had a great day. We did a tour of the whole campus. We got to play on the Prince lawn. We ate in the dining hall. We crashed Dr. Christia's lecture. We got to have some guest speakers, some Q&A. I got some of my friends from the Mr. program to do some games and t-shirts and everything for them. And it was really a great experience, but then what really hit me about it was what my students said after the fact. And I did even have to, I did fundraise myself over $1,000 to bring my class there and enjoy this nice day together. And you will see some of my students' reflections on this day here that one of my young men said here, it don't matter what color you are, everybody has a chance to come get an education. So before this point, it really stuck out to me that he had already internalized the fact that I don't really see black people going to college, black people must not go to college, because he hadn't seen that before. He didn't really have a role model in his life or somebody that looks like him to show him that this was a possibility for his life. You can see some more thank you letters that my students wrote after the fact, where one of my students wrote, I learned that education is the key to life, and no matter your skin color or anything, everyone deserves to have an education. And I'm really happy that I was able to share that moment with my students, and I think that they understood an enhanced appreciation of how far they could go with a quality education. And while I gave you a very specific example from the United States and specifically South Carolina, I think that there's a lot of transferable knowledge from this example. And even outside of the United States, we can find evidence of how poverty has many different impacts on education. I found some data here about poverty in Japan, and then when I saw this article from NHK that says education opportunities are not equal, and while Japan has very different race issues than most countries, we still see how poverty affects people's access to a quality education. So that's basically what I want to kind of leave you guys with to think about is what barriers and opportunities have existed in your own education, and what barriers exist in your own community, and what can be done to overcome these barriers. And as we do that, we can make sure that every student has a chance for a high quality education, and we can make sure that we close these achievement gaps, and we can make sure that we all have somebody we can identify with in our classrooms. And that's kind of what I've centered my career around, and I'm happy to share this little bit of information with you, and I thank you guys for your time today.